And now I bring in, I think I know a little bit about this guy, Hall of Fame broadcaster, Ford Frick Award winner, um, nearly 50 years as broadcaster of the Cincinnati Reds, and I share his last name, my dad, Marty Brennaman. Dad, how you doing?
I'm good. It's great to be on with you guys, you and Joe and Bill. It's a lot of fun. It's the night of remembrance, and Charlie's stuff was spectacular. I was with him yesterday at Vinny's funeral memorial, and you got you got a good guy in Bob Costas, and you got a good guy in Charlie, no question.
Well, let me ask you. You go to the funeral, and Bob shared some of the names and the people that were there, and you and I spoke on the phone just a couple hours after you had left the funeral. And I shared with the audience earlier about how, it struck you that there were no celebrities that got up there and spoke like we see so many times, especially in a city like Los Angeles. But it was all about just his family, right?
It was incredible. The whole thing from the beginning until end, and you and I both, we're not Roman Catholic, but I was blown away, and Amanda was blown away by the taste in which this whole thing was laid out. This was a private by invitation only, and there were 350 people there. And everywhere you turned, if it wasn't a celebrity, it was a former member of the Dodgers or Jaime Jarrín or people like that.
Peter O'Malley.
Yes. And nobody spoke but his grandchildren, his children, and his great-grandchildren. They were other than the two priests that conducted the private, it was a high Catholic mass for burial is the way it's described to me. It was simply an extension of what Vin Scully was all about. I mean, he's one of the great people I've ever known in my life. And I'm privileged to say that he and I were as close as we could be, because Vinny had a way about him that he would let you get only so close to him unless you were really, truly on the inner circle. And as close as I was thrilled to death to be there, because the mere fact, when I hung up the phone, Steve Brenner, who has been a longtime friend of mine, was a media relations director, and Billy knows him back in the 70s. And Steve and I were dear friends, and he's back with the Dodgers in a much greater role now. And he called me at 6:30 Saturday night and said that the Scully family would like for you to be in attendance if you could be there on Monday. But we had to scurry and make plane reservations and fly out there. And Amanda said, you need to be there. And I said, I know I need to be there. If his family thought enough of me or the recommendation of someone else to ask me to come, then I needed to be there. And it'll be one of the great memories of my lifetime, because here's a guy who went to the grocery store, who went to the service station to get gas, whatever it might be, when he was healthy and was able to do all of those things. And there was never a day that went by when someone didn't say, you're the greatest baseball announcer who ever lived.
Yep.
He had no ego. He had zero ego. And I was just impressed by the way he dealt with people, the way he dealt with me when I came into the league in 1974. He was just one of the most special people I've ever known in my lifetime.
Billy, I think you know my dad a little bit. Fire away.
Marty, how you doing?
Anything goes from now on.
Well, what are you up to? Oh, we lost him.
Did we? Yeah, he froze up.
There he is. Yeah, he's there. Hey, Marty, you've really dealt with, because you are one of them, the great announcers throughout baseball, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that you're going to tell me that Vin Scully's the best of the best. But what is it from your point of view, and Bob Costa shared a little bit from his point of view, what sets him apart, or what set him apart professionally? I'm the greatest guy that ever lived, no doubt about it, but professionally on the air, what set him apart from everybody else?
I think the biggest single thing, Bill, is the fact that he had such an eloquence and such a command of the English language, and such an ability to come up with a phrase at the most probable time that nobody would ever think about. And I tell people all the time, go back and watch a ninth inning of Sandy Koufax's perfect game, or go back and watch his call of Kirk Gibson's home run off Dennis Eckersley, especially that call, because he said in a season that was improbable, the impossible just occurred. Who in the hell would have ever thought about saying something? I mean, honest to God now. I mean, let's be honest. There are guys unbelievably in our profession that will not concede the fact that he's the greatest announcer in the history of baseball. If they don't, their ego is so big that they won't allow themselves to do that. But to come up with a phrase like that off the top of his head, and I know it was a perfect phrase for the moment, and it was not planned, because who in the hell would have thought that Kirk Gibson would have hit a home run on one leg off Dennis Eckersley? No, this is a thing that set him apart from everybody.
Hey, Joe, hey, Dad, I don't know. Joe List is a big Boston guy, big Red Sox fan. Joe, did you know the Reds beat the Red Sox in the World Series in 1975? I know you weren't born yet.
Games.
In fact, I happen to know. Oh, you broke up. I'm not even kidding. You broke up, so I missed it.
Joe, I said it took us 7 games.
It did take 7. I know a lot about those. Pat Darcy, I remember, gave up a game winner, I believe.
Yeah.
And now the Reds won back-to-back World Championships there, but I think the average American thinks that Carlton Fisk walked off the World Series and the Red Sox won the 1975 World Series.
Let me tell you something about that. We went back to the first time I'd been back to Boston since 1975 was in 2002 or 2003 when we played them in interleague play at Fenway Park. And they chose that weekend, a weekend, by the way, that the Red Sox swept the Reds, where they commemorated the right field foul pole as a Johnny Pesky foul pole and the left field foul pole as the Carlton Fisk foul pole. And I said on the air the second night in, I said, if you didn't know any better, you would think that there was never a second game to that World Series, because they made such a big deal about that. But let me seriously make a point. The thing I very objectively say to people, it was one of the great World Series of all time. But people need to remember one thing. Jim Rice did not participate in that World Series because Vern Rule hit him with a pitch on the hand in September in a game against the Detroit Tigers, and he was a non-participant. It would have been interesting to see how that series would have turned out had Jim Rice been active and healthy and productive like he always was that year with the Red Sox.
Right, and then Yaz had to go out and play left again. Can I ask a general?
Fine.
I wanted to say, can I ask a general question about play-by-play, but also maybe you could speak to Vin, knowing him so well. I'm a comedian, and you can feel, I've done late night TV. Your heart rate is up and you're trying to perform with your heart rate up. But with a comedian, you know your jokes. With play-by-play, it's Game 7 of the World Series. It's Kirk Gibson. Your heart rate has to be going up naturally as a human being. How did you personally, do you have any insight into Vin? How do you keep your heart rate down enough to stay in the moment and not screw up a huge moment like that? I wonder if you could mention that at all.
All I can do is speculate, but I got to believe that Vin Scully's pulse rate was the same in the 7th inning when Gibson left the on-deck circle and went to the plate to hit as it was when the first batter stepped in to lead Game 7 off. There was never a time that I thought Vinny lost it. And he was also a guy who was a master at shutting up television and letting the crowd react to the people sitting in their homes or in bars or wherever they might have been watching a ball game. I don't think his pulse ever. Maybe in his younger years. I think when he was broadcasting Dodger games back before they moved from Brooklyn to Los Angeles, maybe his youthful exuberance might have carried over into maybe an increased pulse rate. But once he got settled, I can't imagine his pulse rate ever jumped up more than what would be normal for most human beings.
I got to ask you this, continuing kind of in the same vein, Dad, with broadcasting in general. Okay, well, we've talked about Vin Scully, and everybody agrees he's the best of all time. So you put him on this shelf over here.
Correct.
And look, this is not in a disparaging way in any way, shape, or form. Everybody's different, and everybody kind of has the guy they sort of like. Oftentimes, it's your local guy, but maybe it's just the style of a guy. I always like the style more of the Harry Careys, the Marty Brennamans, the Bob Princes of the world, where I really felt like I was sitting next to the guy at the bar, because there'd be times where you'd be critical of the home team's local player or critical of a decision made by the manager. I think that those guys like you, guys like Harry, guys like Bob Prince, complete gone, a breed we'll never see or hear from again in the future of sports broadcasting. You agree with that?
Yes, I agree. Emphatically, I agree with that, Tom. And for a lot of reasons, people, I don't put myself in the same class as the Scullys and the Bucks and the Harwells and people like that. If other people want to put me in that class, I'm appreciative as hell. But using them as an example, all those guys were personalities. And I'm not saying this in a derogatory manner, but if you go from top to bottom of all Major League Baseball teams going today, you're not going to find too many announcers, whether they do home radio or home television, that have the kind of personalities that those guys had. These guys are more concerned with making sure that everything that comes out of their mouths doesn't incite someone who's in a position to call them on the carpet and, worst case scenario, give them their pink slip. I truly believe that guys doing big league baseball today that are relatively new or been around a while, there's not a damn thing they're going to say to be critical of their club. Is that taking away from a broadcast? Absolutely, without any question, it takes away from a broadcast. Now, I'm not saying hammer the club. I think myself today, I put myself in the position of if I were doing the Reds today, and I go back to what Bob Knight's wife told him one day, the horse is dead, stop beating it. You can't say it every night. This club's, you can't say that. But you can sure express an opinion when a guy doesn't run a ball out, when a guy plays a ball poorly, hit into a gap or gets a bad jump on a ball. You can certainly have the freedom. And honest to God, I've watched a lot of baseball on television and listened on radio the last 2 or 3 years since I've retired, and I ain't heard a whole lot of criticism. Do I think that takes away from the broadcast? Absolutely, unequivocally, I think it does.
Billy, I'm curious your opinion on this, Bill, because being a former GM, I mean, look, you're sitting there and you're pissed off too when your team stinks and not playing well, or a guy's not running hard or whatever it is. But it's the product that your paycheck's coming from the same guy that signs Marty Brennaman's paycheck. How do you react to that as a general manager?
You got to have thick skin, and you got to understand it's a business, and you have to understand you're looking for numbers, you're looking for ratings, and Marty, I really, and I know Joe does too. We really appreciate the humility, but you are in the same class with Vinny and the greats, and I know I've seen the numbers. The Reds are a small market; they're a real small market, but their radio numbers are off the charts, and I'm not sure if they still are. But they were when I was there, and you're a big part of that. And so I will tell you that from my point of view, I really never cared what was being said about the club. I was worried about the club and what's being said about the club by our announcers. I'm okay with whatever they say as long as millions of people are listening to us. The more we can get on board. And Marty, I was there. I usually heard him when the club was on the road, because when they were home, I usually was there watching the game. But we had great numbers. We had great fans. They can't always afford to come to the ballpark, but our radio numbers and our TV numbers were just great, and that's because Marty had them interested. And so, do you care much more than that? No, we're all, we get frustrated if the club's playing poorly, and Walt would get pissed off if the club's playing poorly. I get upset. We all get upset, but we still want people to listen. We still want people to show up. And whatever you're doing, Marty, it was working because, you had some great numbers in a small market. And Marty, you do, Tom shouldn't say this. I should say this. You do belong in that tier with Vince Scully and all those greats.
Well, I appreciate that, Bill. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And Joe, sure. You know what? You almost grew up listening to my dad. The only
is that
time,
right?
Correct me if I'm wrong here, Dad. The only time maybe you thought about leaving Cincinnati was Boston, right?
I got a contract. I'm down in my basement now. Every wall is filled with stuff that happened in my 46-year career. And to my left on the wall is a contract written by the guy who owned the station in Boston that had the rights to the Red Sox broadcast, and he also had the rights to the Reds broadcast here in Cincinnati. And he wrote me on a piece of legal pad. He wrote me a 5-year contract to be the voice of the Boston Red Sox back in 1981. And that's as close as I ever came to leaving Cincinnati. I had offers from other clubs, but the Red Sox were the closest that I ever came, gave serious thought. At the end of the day, I figured out my act flies well in Cincinnati. It may not fly well in Boston.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, I'm always amazed by history like that. And Joe Castiglione is now a huge part of my childhood. And
he's a buddy of mine. Joe's a buddy of mine.
Well, I love him, and I don't know how much more time he has. We talked about this earlier in the show. It's with these play-by-play guys. It's like a little piece of your childhood goes away.
I listened to guys back in the 50s when I was growing up in Virginia, and that was my introduction to Major League Baseball. Not going to a game, but listening to games before I ever went to Washington D.C. with my mom and dad and my brother to see the Yankees and the Senators play back in 1955. And so that was my entree into the game, and it was magical then. Whether it's still magical today, I don't know. But back then, in the so-called golden era of Major League Baseball, it was a magical time for a young kid growing up in Virginia.
Well, Dad, in your retirement right now, I would highly suggest, if you've got some time to kill, because I think it might win an award, is the video of Joe and his day as a player in the Pioneer League just a few weeks ago. Joe, would you like to share maybe a little preview of what that might be like if he goes and gives that up?
I thought it went pretty good, and it's a recurring theme. The editor kind of messed me up a little bit. I mean, he showed. We didn't see all the good stuff, and my skipper also didn't let me show off my skills as well as it could. But I think it went pretty well. It's got over 12,000 views now, and only a few negative comments on the internet.
Give me one of the negative comments.
Somebody said,
example.
Somebody said, Make-A-Wish is really doing great work for these young kids. And somebody else made reference to my leg, the skin tone of my legs. But I'm a city guy. What do you want? I'm not a beach guy.
Would it look like you were painting closets? I mean,
hanging paper in a closet all winter?
It looks like I fell into the chalk before they drew the baselines.
Fell in the flower pot, yeah.
But I hadn't faced live pitching in 23 years. I turned around and hit from the left side and was spraying the ball. And I don't know many 40-year-old comedians that could have done that.
No. Definitely not.
We don't either.
Yeah, we don't know any.
All right. That's enough. Dad, thanks so much for being with us tonight. It's been great having you. And
Marty, it's great seeing you.
Billy, great to hook up with you again and see you after a lot of years. Joe, you're a real talent, man. Funny as hell.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Dad, he's getting ready to come to Cincinnati in about a week and a half.
Yes.
You got to go out there and see him. He's going to be up in Westchester.
Find out when and let me know.
Is that the 19th? Is that right, Joe?
19 and 20, I think. Next Friday and
we got to get up there. Your big party, your big 80th birthday party's on the 20th, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to get out there the 19th and see Joe.
Yeah, come on out. Pre-game.
All right, pal.
All right. We'll see you later.
All right.
Thanks Marty.
All right. Thanks, Dad. Love you. See you later on.